perhaps we can start by you just sharing what your role is at Mount St. Vincent and how long you've been here.
I typically say I'm the volunteer coordinator at the Mount.
Okay.
I've done that job since February of 2001, and I've worked at the Mount since February of 1995.
Whoa, that's many, many years.
Yes, it is.
So like 24
Yeah,
years.
23, 24
almost
years,
a quarter of a
yes.
century. What does a volunteer coordinator do?
Well, there are about 200 active volunteers, and they range in age from 14 to 95. And so my role is to support this group of people and find them meaningful opportunities to contribute in the community.
You're kind of a go-between,
Yes, a bridge.
matching need with service.
And I also think of it in a bit of a broader sense that, we do have a fairly high number of volunteers who are over 80. And people who volunteer tend to live longer and are happier and healthier than people who don't volunteer. So for some of our volunteers, it's definitely win-win, but it's a public service to support their well-being.
Right.
Because they have purpose. They're driving here.
Yep. What else stood out for you about the Mount and that made you want to work here?
This is a little embarrassing to say because it involves being sort of fired. I started doing volunteer work when I was in the research lab. I was a lab tech and a pretty isolated lab tech and started realizing, no, this isn't working. And so I got myself back to school. And then our company moved to another building where I was really isolated. I had to suit up and it just was really hard.
I can't imagine you in that setting.
And I found as many excuses as I could not to go to work.
Okay.
And my boss, he came to me one day and he said, Storey, we're going to reconfigure this job and we're going to make it full-time.
Right.
And it was my livelihood. So I said, well, okay, I'll go full-time. And he said, no, you won't.
Okay.
Leave the nest. Okay.
Yeah, so a case of being happily fired, actually.
Yeah, it was hard. I totally recognized that Craig had my own best interests in mind. I started looking at the want ads, and most jobs were for nursing assistants. So I went to school to do that, and then I started doing this practicum at a horrible place. We had to do 10 days, and it was your classic scary place. Meanwhile, I had applied to work at the Mount, and I got the job. So there was a crossover position, about a week period, where I would go to this other place at 6 o'clock in the morning and work all day and then come to the Mount and work until 10 o'clock at night. And I always say that if it wasn't for the Mount, I would have run the other direction.
Right.
Because people would hold on to you and they were desperate. But the Mount was about relationships and taking time, and sure, we were working really, really hard. This is where I wanted to be.
So if there was one word that would describe what you found here, what might that be?
Humanity. There's something very deeply human about the Mount, being supportive to people who are vulnerable and receiving their support.
It's kind of the magic ingredient.
Human-to-human connection, yes. On some level, we all know no matter what's happening, we're all human beings together.
It strikes me as you speak how much your personal life and your work life are one and the same thing.
Well, I do have a general sense of knowing that I've been very fortunate to be in a position in a community that I could draw on my strengths. And I remember, I think this was before I got cancer, I remember getting a sense of, gosh, if I died, I have 10 solid years that I really feel like I contributed to the world. And I really like that feeling. The thing that I learned was the phrase, it's your call. When my mom moved to live here 10 years before she died, and for the first 9.5 years, she was in really good shape. Eventually, I think it's COPD or emphysema really began to catch up with her, and she went through about almost exactly 6 months on hospice and everything like that. And things really changed in terms of how I needed to support her and wanted to support her. And I learned so much from watching people here support their parents or their aunts or uncles. Because when my father died and I was 18, I totally checked out. There had been a divorce early on, so, there were some reasons, but I regretted that. I regret that I did not go see him. I regret that I just pretended it wasn't happening. So with my mom, I got to really be there for her, and I got to say, it's your call. people can choose for themselves. I don't have to. My best self knows I don't have to fix anybody. And an accomplishment was being able to support my mom and be open-hearted to the rest of the community supporting her. And it was a love fest.
What did you do to facilitate that?
That's a good question, because one of the things that I learned came from Relay for Life when David LaFazia and I were walking around the track one night. He was getting his doctorate, and he said the relationships between elders and their adult children often mirrored how the parents had treated the kids.
That makes sense.
So at one point I realized, okay, I had a mother who was a single mom who was a good enough parent. She was not perfect. She was really good enough. She loved us. So that's all I have to do, is I have to be a good enough daughter. After my mom died, the apartment staff did a really lovely thing. I'm not sure if they do this anymore, but they had this gathering for the staff to talk about my mom. People love my mom. And they invite the family members who I got to go. And people were talking about her. And I just started crying. It was just this feeling of love is love. And it's great to have that she has more daughters. It's great that she has all this love. I'm special to her and always will be. So it's fine. It's just that what I said at her memorial that I will say here about the Mount. And it was offered to me by Mitzi Rossman, who's a spiritual care volunteer. I'm sure you know Mitzi. She reminded me of an African saying, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
Right.
And the Mount goes far.